What happens when one of Hollywood's biggest legends sits down for what should be a friendly chat, only to be blindsided by disrespect and cheap shots? In just 36 seconds, a late-night host turned a simple interview into a disaster that nobody saw coming. And what followed was one of the most shocking moments in television history. Before we get into this, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling us what you think about what went down. Now let's get into it. The stage was set like any other night. The audience was buzzing with excitement. The cameras were rolling, and Jimmy Kimmel was sitting behind his desk with that signature smirk on his face. When Sylvester Stallone walked out, the crowd erupted. This was supposed to be a celebration. Stallone had a new project to promote, and the fans were thrilled to see the action icon in person. He waved to the audience, shook Jimmy's hand, and sat down in the guest chair. But from the very first question, something felt off. "So Sly, great to have you here," Jimmy started, leaning back in his chair like he owned the world. "I gotta ask, at your age, are you still doing your own stunts? Or do you let the younger guys handle the hard stuff now?" The audience laughed nervously. Stallone smiled, but you could see in his eyes that the comment didn't sit right. "I do what I can," he replied calmly. "I've been doing this for over 5 decades, and I'm still here, still working, still giving people what they want to see." Jimmy nodded, but there was something dismissive in his expression. Right. But come on, you're not exactly a spring chicken anymore. I mean, you've had a great run, but don't you think it's time to maybe step aside and let the new generation take over?" The audience went quiet. You could feel the tension starting to build. Stallone's smile faded just a little. "I don't think age defines what you're capable of," he said. "I'm still in great shape. I still train every day, and I'm still passionate about what I do. If people want to see me, I'm going to keep showing up." Jimmy laughed, but it wasn't a friendly laugh. It was the kind of laugh that makes you feel small. "Yeah, but let's be honest. Some of your recent movies haven't exactly been box office gold, right? I mean, when was the last time you had a real hit?" Stallone's jaw tightened. You could see the irritation starting to show. "I've had plenty of hits," he said, his voice a little sharper now. "And I'm proud of every project I've been a part of. Not everything is about box office numbers. It's about telling stories that matter." But Jimmy wasn't letting up. Sure, but come on. Rocky was decades ago. Rambo was decades ago. Those were your glory days. Don't you ever feel like you're just trying to hold on to something that's already gone?" The audience was completely silent now. This wasn't playful banter anymore. This was starting to feel like an attack. Stallone shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable. "Those characters mean a lot to me and to millions of fans around the world," he said. "I'm not holding on to anything. I'm continuing to create and to inspire. That's what I do." Jimmy leaned forward, and his tone shifted from playful to condescending. "Inspire? Come on, Sly. You're basically a walking punchline at this point. I mean, half the internet makes fun of how you can barely move your face anymore because of all the work you've done. Don't you think that's kind of sad?" The room went ice cold. The audience gasped. Some people looked at each other in disbelief. This was crossing a line, and everyone knew it. Stallone's face turned to stone. His fists clenched on the armrests of the chair. "Excuse me?" he said, his voice low and dangerous. Jimmy doubled down. "I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. You've been in this business forever, and at some point, you have to look in the mirror and accept that maybe your time has passed. You're not the action hero you used to be. You're just an old guy trying to relive the past." Stallone stood up. The movement was so sudden that it startled Jimmy. The host's smirk disappeared, replaced by a flicker of panic. "You know what, Jimmy?" Stallone said, his voice steady but filled with anger. "I came here tonight to talk about my work, to connect with the fans, and to have a good time. But you've turned this into a personal attack. You've disrespected me, you've disrespected my career, and you've shown everyone here exactly what kind of person you are." Jimmy tried to laugh it off. Whoa, relax. I'm just joking around, man. This is a comedy show. Don't take it so seriously." But Stallone wasn't having it. "There's a difference between comedy and cruelty, Jimmy. What you just said wasn't funny. It was mean, spirited, and disrespectful. I've worked my entire life to get where I am, and I'm not going to sit here and let some talk show host tear me down for cheap laughs." The audience didn't know how to react. Some people clapped nervously. Others just sat there in stunned silence. Jimmy looked at his producers off camera, clearly unsure of how to handle the situation. "Come on, Sly, don't be like that. Sit back down. Let's just move on." Stallone shook his head. "No, I'm done here. I don't need this, and I don't need you." He ripped off his microphone and tossed it onto the chair. The sound echoed through the studio. Then he turned and walked off the set. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every second of it. Jimmy sat there, speechless, his face pale. The audience was in shock. Nobody moved. Nobody said a word. It was one of those moments where time seemed to stand still, where you couldn't believe what you were seeing. Jimmy finally tried to recover. "Well, I guess we'll take a quick break," he stammered, forcing a weak smile. But the damage was done. The look on his face said it all. He knew he had messed up badly. Backstage, Stallone didn't stop. He walked straight past the producers, past the staff, past everyone who tried to talk to him. He got into his car and left the studio without saying another word. The whole thing happened so fast that people were still trying to process what they had just witnessed. Back in the studio, the audience was buzzing. People were whispering to each other, pulling out their phones, already texting friends and posting about what had just happened. This wasn't just another celebrity interview gone wrong. This was something bigger. This was a moment. As the show went to commercial, Jimmy sat at his desk, staring at the empty chair where Stallone had been sitting just moments before. His team scrambled around him, trying to figure out how to handle the rest of the show. But there was no coming back from this. The interview was over, and the internet was about to explode. Within minutes, clips of the walkout were everywhere. Social media erupted with reactions. People were divided. Some defended Jimmy, saying he was just doing his job and that Stallone overreacted. But the overwhelming majority sided with Stallone. They called Jimmy disrespectful, arrogant, and out of line. They praised Stallone for standing up for himself and not tolerating the disrespect. One fan tweeted, "Jimmy Kimmel just proved he's more interested in being mean than being funny. Stallone is a legend and deserved better than that." Another wrote, "I've lost all respect for Jimmy Kimmel after watching him attack Stallone like that. That was painful to watch." Even other celebrities started weighing in. Some of Stallone's friends and colleagues in Hollywood publicly supported him, calling out Jimmy for his behavior. The narrative was clear. Jimmy had crossed a line, and everyone knew it. But let's rewind and really break down what happened during that interview, because the details matter. When Stallone first walked out, he was in a good mood. He was smiling, energized, ready to promote his project and have a good time. The audience loved him. They were cheering, clapping, genuinely excited to see him. This was his moment, and he was ready to make the most of it. Jimmy's opening question about stunts seemed innocent enough on the surface, but there was a subtle dig embedded in it. The phrase, "at your age," was the first red flag. It was a way of pointing out Stallone's age without being direct about it. And when Stallone gave a gracious answer, Jimmy didn't accept it. He pushed further. "You're not exactly a spring chicken anymore." That line landed like a punch. It was a direct insult disguised as humor. Stallone handled it professionally, talking about his dedication to fitness and his passion for his work. But Jimmy wasn't interested in hearing that. He wanted to keep poking, keep pushing, keep testing how far he could go. Then came the comment about box office numbers. This was another low blow. Stallone has had an incredible career spanning decades, with countless iconic roles and massive hits. To reduce all of that to recent box office performance was reductive and disrespectful. It was a way of saying, "You're not relevant anymore." And Stallone felt that. You could see it in his body language. He was starting to tense up, starting to realize that this wasn't going to be a friendly conversation. But Jimmy kept going. He brought up Rocky and Rambo, two of the most beloved characters in film history, and framed them as relics of the past. He suggested that Stallone was clinging to former glory, that he was desperate to stay relevant. That's when things really started to shift. Stallone's responses became shorter, sharper. He was losing patience. And then came the comment that broke everything. "You're basically a walking punchline at this point." Those words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Jimmy followed it up with a cruel jab about Stallone's appearance, mocking him for cosmetic procedures. That was the moment. That was when Stallone decided he'd had enough. Standing up was a power move. It immediately shifted the dynamic. Stallone wasn't going to sit there and be insulted anymore. He was taking control of the situation. And when he spoke, his words were measured but devastating. He called Jimmy out for cruelty, for disrespect, for being the kind of person who tears others down for entertainment. Jimmy's response was telling. He tried to hide behind the excuse of comedy, saying, "It's just a joke and don't take it so seriously." But that's the classic defense of someone who knows they've crossed a line. It's the excuse bullies use when they get called out, and Stallone wasn't buying it. The line about the difference between comedy and cruelty was perfect. It summed up everything that was wrong with the interview. Comedy should lift people up, make them laugh, bring joy. What Jimmy was doing wasn't comedy. It was mean. It was hurtful. And Stallone named it for what it was. When Stallone ripped off his microphone and walked off, it was a statement. It was him saying, "I have too much self-respect to stay here and be treated like this." And the audience understood that. Even though they were shocked, even though they didn't know how to react in the moment, they understood that Stallone was standing up for himself in a way that many people only wish they could. Jimmy's attempts to salvage the situation were pathetic. He looked panicked, desperate, trying to convince Stallone to sit back down and continue. But Stallone was done. He didn't owe Jimmy anything. He didn't owe the show anything. He had been disrespected, and he was leaving. Simple as that. The walk-off camera was powerful. Every step Stallone took was a rejection of the treatment he had received. He didn't storm off in a rage. He didn't yell or cause a scene. He just walked away with dignity, leaving Jimmy to deal with the mess he had created. Backstage, the atmosphere must have been chaotic. Producers were probably scrambling, trying to figure out what to do next. Do they go to commercial? Do they try to get Stallone back? Do they apologize? But Stallone didn't give them the chance. He was gone, and he wasn't coming back. The fact that he left the entire studio, got in his car, and drove away showed just how serious this was. This wasn't a momentary frustration that would blow over. This was a complete rejection of the entire experience. Stallone didn't want anything to do with it anymore. And really, who could blame him? He's a legend. He's earned his place in Hollywood history. He's inspired millions of people with his work, his dedication, his resilience, and he walked onto that show expecting respect, expecting to be treated like the icon he is. Instead, he got mocked, belittled, and attacked. The audience's reaction throughout the interview was fascinating. At first, they laughed at Jimmy's jokes, because that's what audiences do. They followed the lead of the host, but as the interview went on, the laughter died down. People started to feel uncomfortable. They could sense that something was wrong. And by the end, when Stallone walked off, they were completely silent. That silence spoke volumes. Some people clapped when Stallone stood up for himself, and that's significant. In that moment, they were choosing sides. They were saying, "We're with you, Sly. You didn't deserve that." And that must have meant something to Stallone, knowing that the audience understood what had happened. Jimmy's face after Stallone left was a picture of regret. He knew immediately that he had made a massive mistake. You could see it in his eyes. The color drained from his face. His usual confidence was gone. He looked like a man who realized he had just destroyed his own show. The attempt to go to commercial was weak. It was a desperate move to buy time, to try to figure out how to salvage the rest of the show. But everyone watching knew that the show was over. The main event had just walked out, and nothing Jimmy could do would change that. Producers were probably in his ear, telling him what to say, how to handle it. But what could he say? There was no apology that would fix this. There was no joke that would make people forget what had just happened. The damage was done, and it was irreversible. The speed at which the clips spread online was incredible. In the age of social media, nothing stays contained. Within minutes, people were posting videos, screenshots, quotes. The hashtag started trending immediately. Everyone was talking about it, and the consensus was overwhelmingly in Stallone's favor. People weren't just supporting Stallone because he's a beloved celebrity. They were supporting him because they related to what he experienced. How many people have been in a situation where someone disrespected them, made fun of them, belittled them? And how many people wish they had the courage to stand up and walk away like Stallone did? That's why this moment resonated so deeply. The tweets and posts defending Stallone weren't just about this one interview. They were about a larger issue. They were about how we treat people, especially people who have given us so much entertainment and inspiration over the years. Stallone didn't deserve to be treated that way, and people were angry on his behalf. Other celebrities speaking out added even more weight to the story. When people in the industry, people who know both Jimmy and Stallone, started taking sides, it made it clear that this wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was a genuine moment of disrespect that crossed professional boundaries. The most damning thing about the whole situation was that Jimmy had complete control over how the interview went. He was the host. He set the tone. He chose the questions. He decided to make it personal and mean, and when it blew up in his face, he had nobody to blame but himself. Think about what could have happened if Jimmy had approached the interview differently, if he had been respectful, curious, genuinely interested in Stallone's work and life, it could have been a great conversation. Stallone is a fascinating person with incredible stories to tell. He's overcome obstacles, achieved incredible things, inspired generations. There was so much material for a positive, engaging interview, but Jimmy chose the low road. He went for cheap laughs at Stallone's expense. He tried to be edgy and provocative, and it backfired spectacularly. He learned a hard lesson that night about the difference between being funny and being cruel. Stallone's decision to walk off wasn't impulsive or emotional in a negative way. It was a conscious choice made by someone who knows his worth. He calculated in that moment that staying would only mean enduring more disrespect, and he decided he valued himself too much to accept that. That's strength. That's self-respect. That's what makes him a hero, not just on screen, but in real life. The way Stallone handled himself throughout the interview, even as things got worse and worse, showed incredible restraint. He didn't lose his temper. He didn't start yelling. He tried to steer the conversation back to his work, to the positive things he wanted to talk about. But when it became clear that Jimmy wasn't interested in that, when Jimmy made it personal and cruel, Stallone made his choice. The moment when he said, "There's a difference between comedy and cruelty," will be remembered as one of the most powerful comebacks in talk show history. It wasn't a witty one-liner. It wasn't a joke. It was a simple, honest truth that cut through all of Jimmy's excuses and laid bare what was really happening. Jimmy's attempt to play it off as just comedy was insulting. It was gaslighting, trying to make Stallone seem like he was overreacting when in reality, Jimmy was the one who had behaved inappropriately, and Stallone didn't fall for it. He stood his ground, stated his truth, and left. The visual of Stallone ripping off the microphone was symbolic. It was him literally removing himself from the conversation, from the show, from the dynamic. He was taking back his power. He was saying, "You don't get to do this to me anymore." Walking off that set took courage. It would have been easier to just sit there and take it, to finish the interview and complain about it later in private. But Stallone chose to make a statement in that moment, to show everyone watching that you don't have to accept disrespect, no matter who it's coming from or what the circumstances are. The fact that he didn't look back, didn't hesitate, didn't second-guess himself, showed that he was completely sure of his decision. He knew it was the right thing to do, and he did it without apology. Backstage, as he walked past all those people, he must have felt a mix of emotions. Anger, certainly, at how he'd been treated, but also probably relief. Relief that he didn't have to sit there anymore. Relief that he'd stood up for himself. Relief that he'd shown everyone what he was made of. Getting in his car and leaving the studio was the final statement. He wasn't going to stick around and give anyone the chance to try to change his mind or smooth things over. He was done, and he meant it. The silence in the studio after he left must have been deafening. All those people, all those cameras, all that equipment, and nobody knowing what to say or do. It was a moment of collective shock, everyone trying to process what they'd just witnessed. Jimmy, sitting at his desk, staring at the empty chair, probably replaying the interview in his head, realizing all the moments where he could have pulled back but didn't. That image of him sitting there, defeated, knowing he'd messed up, is almost as powerful as Stallone walking off. The audience didn't know whether to clap, to boo, to stay silent. They were caught in the middle of something they never expected to see. They came for entertainment, for laughs, for a fun night, and instead they witnessed a confrontation that made them uncomfortable. But that discomfort was important. It made people think. It made them question what they find funny, what crosses the line, how we should treat each other. That's the kind of impact that lasts long after the initial shock wears off. The people pulling out their phones, documenting what happened, knew they were seeing something significant. In that moment, they became part of the story, witnesses to a moment that would be talked about for years to come. The buzz in the audience, the whispering, the texting, all of that showed that people were engaged, that they cared, that this mattered to them. It wasn't just another forgettable late-night interview. It was something real, something raw, something that broke through the usual scripted nature of these shows. And that's what made it so powerful. In a world where so much of television is planned and rehearsed and controlled, this was genuine. These were real emotions, real conflict, real consequences. There was no script for what happened. There was no safety net. It was just two men, one showing his worst side and one showing his best. The internet exploding with reactions proved just how much people cared. This wasn't a niche story that only a few people would hear about. This was everywhere. Everyone was talking about it. Everyone had an opinion. And the vast majority of those opinions supported Stallone. That support must have meant something to him. Even though he'd been disrespected, even though he'd had to walk away from an interview, he knew that millions of people had his back. They saw what happened. They understood, and they stood with him. The fans, tweeting about losing respect for Jimmy, showed that actions have consequences. Jimmy might have thought he was being funny, might have thought the audience would laugh along with him, but instead, he lost credibility. He lost trust. He showed people a side of himself that they didn't like. Meanwhile, Stallone gained even more respect. People who already admired him more. People who maybe didn't know much about him suddenly saw him as a role model for standing up for himself. He turned a negative situation into a positive example of self-respect and dignity. The celebrity reactions added another layer to the story. These were people who work in the same industry, who understand the pressures and dynamics of these interviews. And they were calling out Jimmy, saying he was wrong, saying Stallone deserved better. That peer validation is significant. It sent a message to other talk show hosts too. It said, "Watch how you treat your guests. There are lines you shouldn't cross." There's a difference between playful teasing and genuine disrespect. It was a reminder that celebrities are people too, with feelings and boundaries that should be respected. The narrative that emerged was crystal clear. Jimmy was the villain. He was arrogant, cruel, and got what he deserved when his guest walked out. Stallone was the hero. He was dignified, strong, and showed everyone how to stand up to a bully. That narrative spread because it was true. It wasn't spin or manipulation. It was what actually happened, captured on camera for everyone to see. There was no denying it, no way to rewrite it or explain it away. Jimmy's behavior throughout the interview, the escalation from subtle digs to outright insults, showed a pattern. It wasn't one bad joke. It was a sustained attack dressed up as comedy, and Stallone gave him multiple chances to change course, to steer things in a better direction. But Jimmy kept pushing. The age comments were particularly cruel because they targeted something Stallone can't control. Getting older happens to everyone. Mocking someone for their age is lazy and mean, and doing it to someone who has accomplished as much as Stallone has is especially disrespectful. The box office comments were designed to make Stallone feel irrelevant, to suggest that his best days were behind him. But Stallone knows his worth isn't defined by recent box office numbers. He's a legend. His legacy is secure. Jimmy's attempts to diminish that only made Jimmy look petty and insecure. Bringing up Rocky and Rambo as if they were ancient history was another miscalculation. Those characters are timeless. They mean something to people. They represent perseverance, strength, the triumph of the underdog. Trying to use them as evidence of Stallone living in the past was completely missing the point of why those characters matter. The walking punchline comment was where Jimmy revealed his true colors. That wasn't a joke. That was malice. That was someone trying to hurt another person for entertainment. And it didn't work. It just made Jimmy look cruel. The comment about cosmetic procedures was even worse. It was deeply personal, attacking Stallone's appearance in a way that was meant to embarrass and humiliate. Whether or not Stallone has had work done is nobody's business, and certainly not something to mock on national television. Stallone's response to that comment, the immediate shift in his demeanor, showed that Jimmy had finally gone too far. That was the breaking point. That was the moment where Stallone decided he was done trying to be gracious, done trying to redirect the conversation, done giving Jimmy chances to be better. Standing up was an act of defiance. It was Stallone saying, "I will not be treated this way." And the power in that moment came from his calm certainty. He wasn't throwing a tantrum. He was making a choice. His words, calling out the cruelty, naming what Jimmy was doing, were perfectly chosen. He didn't attack Jimmy personally. He didn't stoop to Jimmy's level. He just stated facts and drew a clear line in the sand. Jimmy's panic when Stallone stood up was visible. His smirk disappeared. His body language changed. He knew immediately that he'd lost control of the situation, and he didn't know how to get it back. The "it's just a joke" defense is what cowards say when they get called out. It's refusing to take responsibility. It's trying to make the other person seem like the problem for not having a sense of humor. But everyone watching knew it wasn't just a joke. It was an attack. Stallone not accepting that excuse was crucial. He didn't let Jimmy off the hook. He didn't let him minimize what had happened. He held him accountable in that moment, in front of everyone. The microphone toss was dramatic, but not overly so. It was just enough to emphasize that he was done, that this conversation was over. And then he walked away, leaving Jimmy to face the consequences of his actions alone. That walk off camera will be replayed forever. It's one of those iconic television moments that transcends the specific circumstances and becomes about something larger. It's about dignity. It's about self-worth. It's about refusing to be diminished by someone who should know better. Jimmy calling after him, trying to get him to come back, was pathetic. There was no coming back from what he'd said. Stallone knew that, and so did everyone watching. The empty chair left behind became a symbol of Jimmy's failure, a symbol of the guest who wouldn't tolerate disrespect, a symbol of a moment that changed how people saw both men. The commercial break was a mercy for Jimmy, giving him a moment to collect himself, but it didn't change anything. When the show came back, Stallone was gone, and everyone knew why. This interview will be studied as an example of how not to conduct yourself as a host. It will be used in discussions about respect, boundaries, and the responsibility that comes with having a platform. Jimmy had the power in that situation, and he abused it, and he paid the price. Stallone, on the other hand, will be remembered for this moment as much as for any of his films. Not because of the drama, but because of the principle. He showed people that you can stand up for yourself with class and dignity. You don't have to yell or fight. You just have to know your worth and refuse to accept anything less than respect. The whole incident, from start to finish, took less than 15 minutes. But the impact will last forever. It's a reminder that how we treat people matters. That words have power. That cruelty disguised as comedy is still cruelty. And that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply walk away.